I said, why? Well, I can't get those kids together for these 3 nights a week just at the dinner table. I said, you have no choice if you want to save your kids. You change your schedules, you make sacrifices, you make them make sacrifices. They have things they can do, but some things they may have to drop that aren't that important because they need to be there at least 3 nights a week. And they kept shaking their heads, it's not going to work. So I spent 2 to 3 weeks now working with them on that. Finally, they got the kids to settle down for 3 nights a week to eat dinner and begin to talk. 2 months later, I got a call from the woman. She said, we don't need you anymore. Ooh, okay, what did I do wrong? There we go. She said, no, she was just kind of kidding. She said, no, things are going pretty good. She said, we're learning how to talk to our kids. We're learning how to communicate. We're learning how to allow them to communicate and talk and be themselves. We are empowering them by doing that. And Junior stopped fighting in school. As far as we can tell, Sis is not cutting herself anymore. Didn't take a pill to get that done, did it? You see, it just took knowing and caring about the needs of people. We have leaders in the church today that won't allow members to be who they are. They won't allow members to communicate how they feel about things. They won't allow members to problem solve because they want to control the situation. They're not biblical leaders. They are what we've called positional leaders. You notice how I'm leading up to the fact that positional leaders themselves have insecurity problems. Now, maybe they just haven't learned how to be a relational leader. I'll give them that credit, of course. But if they continue to be positional leaders and they will resist any temptation to change and be more relational and allow the family, the body of Christ to experience these things, they are then dysfunctional and they have deep insecurity issues. And if that goes on in the eldership for any period of time, then the church becomes dysfunctional. I spent 3 days down in Garden Grove, California just recently. I think I mentioned it to you yesterday. And in this kind of leadership meeting, I had several men from congregations there. 10 congregations were represented. All 10 of those churches were losing members. And it wasn't because the church building wasn't comfortable for them. It wasn't because they didn't have a pretty good preacher. It wasn't because they didn't have money in the congregation or whatever. It was because of domineering elderships who wouldn't allow them to go through this process. And they were unhealthy. 10 of them, to one degree or another. And they ate this stuff up. They said, we're trying to learn how to change that. A couple of them were elders. Because we have to realize how we are damaging our churches and our church families when as leaders we cannot allow these things to be experienced in the church or in the home. This is serious business, folks. Maybe you haven't been touched by it in any way, but I tell you what, having counseled people who are struggling with this kind of thing over the years, it's serious business. And depending on the degree, of course there are degrees in just about everything, depending on the degrees or the degree that the primary stressor limits these areas, that will determine how dysfunctional the children will be when they leave home. Very insecure, very needy. And everything's a threat out there. When I counsel families that came from dysfunctional families, they don't want to deal with problems because problems are a threat to them. And all they can see when they look at problems is the fact that they're going to come out on the wrong end of the stick here. That it's going to demean them, disrespect them, make them have to be vulnerable. And you don't want to be vulnerable when you're in a dysfunctional family. You put on a hard shell. You do whatever your primary stressor tells you to do. You be whatever your primary stressor tells you to be. And then you leave and you wind up being a people-pleasing person. And you wind up being and doing something that's not who you are. And it's eating at you all the time. Maybe you handle it pretty well. Or maybe you go to drugs. Or other ways of dysfunctional belief systems to help you somehow deal with your insecurities. Do you think this is just an isolated situation I'm talking about? Do you think this doesn't happen in churches? Do you think this is a rare occasion? We better think differently because it isn't. It may not be a problem in this church. I don't know. I don't know your families here. I could spend probably an hour with any of you talking about your families, and I'd find out who's dysfunctional. It wouldn't take long, because I've done it for many, many years. It doesn't mean that dysfunctional means you're evil. I don't want to give that impression. It doesn't mean you're a bad person and you're going to hell. There's no hope for you. I don't want to give that impression. It means you're dysfunctional. Dysfunctional is the opposite of what? Functional. How do you get functional? Doing things God's way. Ephesians 5. Husbands, love your wives. Listen to them. Respect their opinions. You don't have to agree with them. Fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath. Ephesians 6:4. Okay? Bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Let them be who they are, who God designed them to be. And in churches, let people express how they feel about things. Elderships that have this tendency to get into a bunker mentality because all of a sudden somebody said something and they disagree with the eldership, what they're doing. Whoa, wait a minute, this is terrible. Let's gather together and see how you see in this bunker mentality, how we now can look at that person. He's the enemy now. All of a sudden he said something and wants to do something different than what we want to do, and all of a sudden he's the enemy, isn't he? They don't want to problem solve because they're threatened by problems. Now, this happens to different degrees in churches, but it happens, doesn't it? It happens in families. And so when we're insecure in ourselves, then we don't want to face problems. Some of the things I have to do in counseling couples that come out of dysfunctional families right away is teach them how to compromise, how to respect other people's opinions, and how to work through problems. And it is a tough job because if they came out of dysfunctional families, they don't have any idea. And on the job, you think they don't have problems with, or have difficulties with problems? On the job? You don't think they have threats and fears when a problem pops up and they don't know how to handle it? And they take all the responsibility on themselves, and so now they're angry and upset. They distance themselves maybe from other workers. They put down other workers. They're always in the blame game because problems are something they never learn how to deal with. Now, kids who come up and grow up in dysfunctional families, they already have a sense of low self-esteem and self-worth. So when they start getting to the age of teenagers, maybe doing some dating or looking around, they have sonar and radar. They look for other boys and girls that in their eyes they can tell, and somehow they can imagine that these kids that I'm looking at now I'm attracted to because they didn't come from the wealthy families, or they didn't come with the families in it all together. They seem to be squared away. They'll never accept me, they'll reject me, so I'm going to be gravitating towards those kids that don't have it squared away. I can see the insincerity in their hearts. I can see the fear. I can see the fact that they are afraid of their world and they feel like left out of the world and not worth anything. I'm gravitating to them because that's where I'm at. So now I make a dysfunctional family, and I have kids growing up in a dysfunctional family, and guess what? Unless somewhere down the road after they leave that home, they get some counseling to help them deal with their issues, they're going to be the same way as their parents. Now, this is a very gloomy situation, I understand. And it's something we don't want to talk about anymore we have to. But it's killing churches, it's killing families. Not literally, but emotionally, psychologically, and spiritually. And it's serious. I don't know how much time I've got left. I could spend another 3 or 4 hours on this, do a regular seminar on it, but I don't have the time. Maybe you have a couple of questions at this point that you want to ask me. Feel free, we're a family here, aren't we? Yes?
I just had a question about that primary stressor. When someone is trying, you recognize that person as trying to control.
Mm-hmm.
You acknowledge that they're doing it because they have some sort of self-esteem problem, or
yes.
So how do you relate to them in a healthy way? Do you just say, "Oh, well, they've got this problem, so I've got to, accept that and just say that's just part of who they are," or how do you deal with it?
It's no good just to write them off. They're dysfunctional. Forget it. We don't hang with dysfunctional people, right? No, it doesn't do any good to do that. What you need to do is develop relationships. Relationships